who thinks. A warm welcome to everyone who has joined us to attend the second webinar in the special series of Read Program webinars held for parents of students at DPS Patna, Pune, Ludhiana, and Coimbatore on inculcating reading cultures at home. The webinars are an initiative of Takshila Educational Society to dwell into the relevance of reading as a life skill. Head Start with Reading is a part of the series of webinars for parents that delve into diverse aspects of reading and provide expert advice and direction on strengthening reading support at home. As you are aware, the Read program is a course scholastic plugin implemented in our 4 schools since 2013-14, wherein class-specific supplementary books are prescribed for students without any added burden of assignment or assessment, and 1 period weekly is allotted only for pleasure reading, wherein not only the students, but the teachers, the outsourced staff, the management, and the support staff. Not just that, even the visitors who visit the school are encouraged to read. As you know, we have entered into the 9th year of Read program, and we have engaged Bookworm, a Goa-based charitable trust working for library engagement and education to enhance, revamp, and revitalize it. Today's session, Head Start with Reading, is a part of this journey to inculcate the culture of reading. In today's session, our speaker, Sujata Noronha, attempts to continue the dialogue with parents of nursery to 2 on the power and potential of reading in homes to raise readers and thinkers in our society. The webinar ponders upon what makes a good collection of reading, what are the features and potential of book sets prescribed under the Read program for the 4 class levels, and shares simple and effective practices to maximize the benefits of book engagement with children. Sujata Noronha is dedicated to the acts of reading, teaching, and learning. She is the founder director of Bookworm, a library-based organization in Goa. She holds master's degree in management and education and MPhil degree in education. Sujata conceptualized the Library Educator's course, a first of its kind professional development course, and executes it in collaboration with Tata Trust initiative Parag for educators, teachers, and librarians of school-aged children. She is consultant to numerous NGOs and schools in India, as well as to the Government of Tibet. She co-teaches a First Language Pedagogy Course at TISS Mumbai and merges children's books into every aspect of her work. Sujata believes that books are enablers of positive change and is committed towards promoting and supporting good books for all. So here we begin the webinar. Over to Sujata ma'am.
Thank you, Radhika. And thank you, Takshila Education Society, for this continued opportunity to talk with parents. But before we even begin, I deeply and dearly want to thank parents who've signed into this webinar. I was thinking I did a webinar last year when the lockdown was a very new experience for us as a culture and society. And it was a very new experience for me to talk to people I had never met. And there was so much of trust and participation that came back in the form of chat and subsequent emails and requests for book recommendations, that I felt welcomed into this community of the Takshila Education Society parents. And that you will return for a second webinar in this series and give time when we're all inundated with screen exposure, lives that don't seem normal on the best of days. And yet our commitment to our children and your commitment to being present for your children and in learning better ways or listening to better ways is so strong. So I deeply want to begin by thanking parents who've signed in. Thank you so much for your time and for being here. It really means so much to know that there is hope for our children as we move forward in a time that really I'm not sure if any of us can predict what the world will be like, but we have to do our best for our children. And with that note, I want to start and draw back on things that we know for sure. And one thing we know for sure from years of being a literate, civilized humanity is that we can understand each other better if we spend time reading or thinking or listening about stories that belong to other people. And today I want to spend the next 45 to 50 minutes just sharing, as Radhika said in the introduction, some ideas about why this book bag and what's in the book bag. So Radhika, could we move to the next slide? So I just share the plan. Yeah, thank you. So what we're going to do today is wonderful. We finished point 1, which was the introduction. And thank you, Takshila Education Society, for that glowing introduction. We'll spend some time on what I think are principles for reading relationships between maybe Bookworm and Takshila Education Society, between Takshila Education Society and the schools it manages, between the parents and the books that will come into your home, and then between the children and the books. So what are these principles that may hold us down, that become foundational, is what I want to talk about. I definitely want to talk a little bit about what you would have got in the bags and why those books and what we can do with those books, and some very simple suggestions for what you can do until I see you again for our next webinar in terms of practice with these books at home. When these book bags were imagined, we didn't think that this would again be a school year that's at home. So I do understand that this time also needs us to invest in our parents. So again, thank you for being here. I want to begin with a story. Radhika, can we move to the next slide? A story that's old, very old. I was reading about it, and there's allegedly 3,000 years of history on this story. It's a story that came to the culture in the form of a song, which I again think is such a beautiful way to remember that we've been an oral culture. We've carried tradition, practices, beliefs, values through talking about them. And which is why webinars like this for me are so important, because we are continuing a tradition of talking together. We may use a text as the base, but if we can talk about that text, we are actually drawing on what we and this story, I am going to tell it to you, but I thought it would be lovely if you can listen to just a minute of the story in the form of how the song is sung. So I'll just play this for just
ಮಂಡಲ ಮಧ್ಯದೊಳಗೆ ಬೆರೆಯುತ್ತಿಹ ಕರ್ನಾಟ ದೇಶದಿ ಇರುವ ಕಾಳಿಂಗನೆಂಬ ಕನ್ನಡ ಪರಿಯನೆಂದು ಬೇಳೆನು ಎಳೆಯ ಮಾವಿನ ಮರದ ಕೆಳಗೆ ಕೊಳಲನೂದುವ ಗೊಲ್ಲ ಗೌಡನು ಬಳಸಿನಿಂದ ಗುರುಗಳನ್ನು ಬಳಿಗೆ ಕರೆದನು ಹರುಷದಿ. ಗಂಗೆ ಬಾರೆ ಗೌರಿ ಬಾರೆ ತುಂಗಭದ್ರೆ ತಾಯಿ ಬಾರೆ
Okay, sorry, for some reason I'm unable to play this song for you. I was cheerfully listening to it, thinking that all of you could hear my song. And it's not my song, it's a Kannada folk song. And if any of you in the audience know the story of Punyakoti, I'm going to ask you to be secret keepers. I'm going to ask you to just hold the story quietly while I introduce it to those of you who may have not heard of this story. The reason I chose this story, I will reveal towards the end of it. So in this story, there is a cow and a tiger. And all of you can imagine how this story is going to unfold. The cow has a name called Punyakoti, and she's a gentle cow who's just delivered a calf. She's a new mother, and she's grazing. And as she's grazing, she's so busy following the fresh, sweet grass, she doesn't realize where she wanders. And suddenly she finds herself face to face with a hungry tiger. Now she raises her eyes, those beautiful cow-like eyes that we know bovines have, and she looks at the fierce marble-like eyes of the tiger, who's thinking, aha, here comes my dinner. This is what I've been waiting for. And just before he's about to pounce, the cow decides to take a chance and she pleads. She says, Tiger, I know you've been waiting for me, and I know I've landed up here as food for you. But I have a baby calf at home, and the baby calf doesn't know that she'll never see me again. So I have one request. And the tiger's thinking, my God, what is the world coming to? I'm listening to a cow make a request of me, king, fierce tiger that I am. And in that time that he's thinking, Punyakoti continues. She is trusting that the tiger is listening to her. And she says, all I want is a chance to go back home, to tell my calf that this is my last meeting with her, and I'll return to you, and then you may eat me. And as you can imagine, the tiger is thinking, what nonsense is this? I mean, who, in their right mind is going to let the food go away so that she can deliver a message to her calf, and then he looks up and he sees deep honesty in this cow. Something, as a tiger, he has never paused to even consider. And he thinks, my gosh, she's genuine. She really wants to go talk to her calf and come back. I have waited for the last 4 days for food. I can wait a few more hours. So he looks at the sun and he tells her, before the sun sets, you have to come back. Otherwise, I'll find you. I'll find your calf. And Punyakoti doesn't wait. She just says, thank you, I'll be back. And she leaves. And she goes as quickly as she can back to the shed where her calf is. And she tells her calf that, today I encountered a tiger. His meal, I've promised to return. And I want you to know that I wanted to come and tell you that I will never come back. And someone will look after you and have a good life, and so on. And Punyakoti trots back. Meanwhile, this tiger sitting in the grass is thinking, oh dear, what have I done, right? I've let this delicious food get away. I trusted this cow, and the sun is beginning to sink low. And just when the tiger's thinking, beating himself up mentally that he's done something so stupid, so foolish, Punyakoti comes back. And she gently lays herself down near the tiger and she says, "Thank you for letting me go. And here I am." And looks at the sun setting and has so many thoughts in his head. So many thoughts in his head. And every storyteller takes these thoughts where they want the thoughts to go. That's the magic about storytelling. I can take this story and I can turn it into what I want my audience or my listeners to take from this story. But because you are adults, I want to just leave you with this story. I want you to think of the tiger. I want you to think of Punyakoti, the cow. And I want you to think of what really happened. What happened there? What was new? What was different? What was perhaps right? What was wrong? All these thoughts are possible because you just listened to a story. If any of you want to talk to each other in your home about what you're thinking right now, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. It's what we do with groups when we tell them stories, to allow this to settle in. And then I'll tell you where I'm taking today this story. Radhika, can we move to the next slide? For me, this story, every time I am doubting myself, I'm doubting the groups I'm working with, I'm doubting the books I'm reading, I'm doubting the ideas that come to me, I draw back on this idea of what it is to trust myself in thinking, trust the sources that are coming to me, trust the content that is being produced, and not without questioning. Trust is never without questioning, but trust is the bedrock of what our relationships with the act of reading are. And I wanted to share the story of Punyakoti because for me, there's no other fable that's as solid on trust as this one. Because the tiger trusted Punyakoti to go and come back. He had many questions, but he trusted her. Punyakoti trusted that the tiger would listen to her, and so she asked. Her calf, perhaps, trusted that would never see Punyakoti again, and this is what life is, and surrendered to it. And then Punyakoti honored everything by going back to the tiger. And in some stories, the tiger lets Punyakoti go. In some stories, the tiger rues that he even doubted Punyakoti and questioned what kind of a creature he was. And in some stories, the tiger actually pounces on Punyakoti. So there are different versions of where the story goes, but the idea of this is all embedded in the act of trust. And reading relationships really are founded on this core principle of trust. I hope you can ask me questions about it as we move toward the question and answer. But if we go forward to just remind ourselves about 3 more principles about this reading relationship. Radhika? Thank you. Critical, and something I spoke about at the last webinar, is modeling. Modeling in terms of doing our behaviors, particularly with all our young children. Without us knowing it, we are demonstrating what is important in our homes. So when we spend even some time reading, telling stories, sharing, listening, we are demonstrating to our families that these are important activities. When we spend a lot of time doing something else and then instructing our children to do something that we are not doing, we're also modeling that there are different behaviors for different folks. And sometimes children don't really respect that. They like to see, because we learn about the world from observation, from perception, from not just listening to instructions. So modeling is important. And I hope in all your homes there are books visible, especially now that the bags have reached your house. The second point, which today I'm hoping we spend time on, is how do we have access and variety? What is this idea of choice of books? Who decides who reads what? Should I always read everything that is decided for me? Do I have choice? Is agency important in the relationship of reading? Should we be listening to children's voices? Should we be listening to parents' voices about choice? All important questions, all important considerations, because relationships are never didactic. There is this idea of giving, taking, listening, being open, and learning. Really important to see what is available for our children. So are the read bags enough? And if they are not, how can you get more books into the home? Not necessary to buy. I believe so strongly in libraries. Please find a library or go to your school library as a parent and check out books if you can, so that there is variety in your homes for children to look at and read. And for me, what's been one of the most precious learnings in being with this group on the READ program is to be open. Every time I receive an email from a parent who is saying thank you for the books, or a parent who's asking why these books, or a message about the books being, finally reaching schools or not reaching or about to reach, I'm allowing myself to be open to what this opportunity of learning is presenting for all of us. And I really thank you, parents, for being open to this opportunity to receive books from somebody whom you don't necessarily know, but whom I hope you begin to trust. Because the intention here is to start a reading relationship with you and your children in a way that allows them to, in time, access books they like, choose what are their preferences, and to learn to read and grow. So these are my 4 principles of reading relationships that I want to place, starting with trust, modeling, ensuring access and variety, and staying open. Radhika, we'll move on. Thank you. So I want to move to these bags that you got at home, and I'm so super excited for you. Thank you for receiving them with grace and joy. And deep thank you to the school management for even accepting this idea, for thinking it is something that has to be done, and for investing in it. I think schools always have a choice, right? Especially if it's reading for pleasure. Should we do it or not? Because it's not curricular. It's not necessarily scholastic in terms of a board requirement. So to be part of a school that puts reading joy at the center makes all of you privileged, makes us immensely privileged to partner. So thank you for that. Very quickly, I just wanted to share that the number of books are more or less the same in every bag. And if they're different across a class year, it had a price point attached to it, which you will see from the range of books you've received, that books come with a price on them. And based on the kind of publisher and the nature of that publisher, is it a for-profit publisher, a not-for-profit publisher, a publisher who wants to invest in high-quality paper and high illustrations, or someone who wants to invest in writing over illustrations, prices change. Yes, just like we can buy products in the market with different price tags, books also have that. So that would explain one of the reasons why some bags have 11 books, like the nursery and the prep, and our standard 1 and 2 have 12 books. Ideally, in the ideal world, the little ones should have got more books. So that's something I definitely want to work on. But for now, I'm so super happy you have these bags with this many books. Now, some of you may wonder, I hope all of you are wondering, how were these books chosen? On what basis were these books put into the bag? Why these books? So I want to explain a little bit about the framework of how these books were chosen. So could we go forward, Radhika? Thank you. They're basically, again, 5 principles of library collections that have governed even these tiny little selections of 11 books or 10 books or 12 books. It seems ridiculous maybe to say that we spent days on doing this. And we took all this time, particularly because we don't know your children, we don't know your family. And it's very different from our regular practice when we get to know our children as readers and the family as library readers, it becomes so much a relationship of give and take to recommend books. So we were standing outside this circle of knowing, but within this circle of trust. And we hope we are able to honor that for you. I want to share these 5 ideas based on which we chose books. The first one is genres, which is a French word, and in simple English, it means types. Yeah, what types of books? So in every bag, you will find at least 3 types of books, and broadly in library language, there'll be fiction, which is stories that are made up. There'll be at least 1 book, which is non-fiction, which is representing some reality, some real things. And there would maybe some books in each bag that have what you call fact fiction. So it takes a fact, but it's put in a narrative story form, particularly for younger readers, so that the fact comes through, but it comes in the form of a story. So genres was a consideration. The other consideration, which is really limited for our country, given the multitude of languages, we only have English and Hindi, and English dominates. And in some ways, we resolved this in our mind with saying that the medium of instruction in your schools is English. We want our children to grow in proficiency with English. We don't want the home language to ever stop. But reading in the language of school will definitely build the proficiency in that language without taking away the relationship that happens when we continue to talk to our children in our home language. So that may explain why you have some or more English books and some Hindi books in your bag. Themes is a very critical idea in the discourse of library. A theme is really what is the idea of this story? Like Punyakoti, I shared today with you with the idea of trust. The theme of that story for me was trust. Themes need not be fixed, but sometimes a story has a very strong theme that whoever reads it, they'll say, aha, this story is about friendship. Or yes, this story is about a relationship between a mother and a child. It comes out through the story. It doesn't have to be stated explicitly, because we believe our children have minds that can think and arrive at these conclusions as they become readers. So we've chosen kind of a mixed bag of themes in order to bring the world in that bag to our children. So some themes may come from their own experience of growing up, and some themes may come about worlds that our children are not experiencing, but that is the job of literature. One of the most fundamental symbols we use in talking about literature is that books become mirrors, books become windows. And by this one means that when I look in the mirror, I see myself. So I need to read books that some way allow me to discover more, to go deeper into what I and who I am about over time. And the window books really allow me to understand the world without going too far, because of the good reading, the good text, the good illustration, something opens up for me. So we've tried a mix of window and mirror books. By format, what we mean is some books will have no words at all. And this might come as a shock, because we continue to be a culture that thinks that only reading text is the act of reading. And that's a bit of a problem. In fact, I think this particular, technological revolution that we're all experiencing, because applications are now on our phones, we have to use them so rapidly. We're learning how fast we're moving to a visual world, how many icons we're beginning to read, how many symbols we're beginning to read, and how each one stands for something. Visual language is actually a very powerful tool of the mind that's almost automatic. We rarely have to teach visual language. It seems to be something over generations of our own genetic growth, we are able to read these signs and symbols. It's not easy to read words, right? And to start reading a language. But pictures are organically read and understood. And so wordless books are a very powerful tool, both across language divides as well as to stimulate language, because you look at the picture and you talk about it. So wordless books are in these bags, especially for nursery, prep, and standard 1. And that's what we mean by format. The format of the book, there'll be wordless, there'll be books that are called picture books, which is where you have to look at the picture and the text together. If you read only the text, you're not getting the full story. The two go together. And then there are illustrated books, which is you can only read the story and you still get it. The pictures are just illustrating. They're just highlighting certain parts of the story. So these are formats that without any explicit teaching, children are getting exposed to. And the last, and for Bookworm, it's a critical area of discourse, is representation. Who is in the book and whose world is being represented in the book. And this coheres very closely with the idea of windows and mirrors. So many of us, especially my generation who read in English, we grew up with books that did not represent our world. We grew up reading texts in English and stories in English that represented somebody else's world, but that were brought to us. And what reading research shows us is that actually my comprehension is much stronger when I read first about what I know. And what I know will be what I can recognize, what is representative of me. So that's one. The other is to keep in mind that reading is meant to open the world for our children. So what better way to introduce things that are happening in the world that we want our children to know, because we believe our children will grow up into this world, than through the act of stories. It's why stories like Punyakoti have survived so many thousands of years. You can actually take that story to explain so many concepts. I think so many hard things in the world can also be explained from a folk story like that. So trust that when we've chosen books with certain representation, there is an intention. It's not accidental. And if you have questions about that intention, it is our joy and our privilege to answer that for you. So these are the 5 principles of selection from library work of why you got these books. In addition to this, if we go forward, Radhika, please. In addition to this, we've also looked at the development needs of children of this particular age group who are nursery to standard 2. And I'm just going to illustrate this with just, highlighting some aspects of what I mean by development, because we all know that a 2-year-old child and a 3-year-old child in general is very different. Now, how are they different? Not just physically different, but we know that by the time a child is maybe between 3 and 4, they are able to actually sit down for a longer time on some task. And we call that a kind of attention, that they're able to attend and concentrate for certain longer periods of time than when they were maybe 1.5 or 2. We know that they are able to deal with adults and people outside the family differently as they grow up. So therefore, we also know that they may be ready to be introduced to books about others differently as they grow. We know that growing children have better abilities for self-restraint. That is, they're no longer fully impulsive. If you say, just wait, I'll finish doing this job and I'll come and help you. A 4-year-old is able to wait, but a 2-year-old may not be able to wait. Not because they are zid or naughty, but because their ability to function with restraint has not yet developed to that extent. And as we grow older, we are able to restrain ourselves for much longer periods of time. I think the lockdown and standing in queues has given all of us that ability for self-restraint. We're all able to wait patiently until our turn comes. So it's behavioristic, but it's also developmental. And so we know this changes, right? From between 3, 4, 5, and 6. And so we've tried to include books that will honor this change. So if Radhika will go forward, I'll just give you examples of this. So for parents of nursery and prep, I hope some of these book covers are familiar now to you. Some ideas that have influenced your bags in terms of development needs is that we know that a 3-year-old or a 3.5-year-old is now able to look at an image of a mango and know that it's a mango, look at a balan and know, that's what we use to make rotis. So they're able to see a picture on paper and connect it with the real thing. They're able to look more closely at smaller details and illustrations. They're definitely able to string ideas together, which is what happens on the first page. I can now hold that thought to see what happens on the next page and the next page. Growing children are suddenly able to describe from just one word and 2 words. They are able to say that something is big or small or fast or slow or up or down. So there is description coming into language. There's definitely the start of what we call concepts, which is some of which I mentioned, like up and down, big, fat, light, heavy. All this gets covered in your scholastic curriculum. All this is also thought about in your book bags. You'll find resonance of it in these stories. They are growing in attention. Their ability to turn pages is also becoming stronger. So we can find very young children at the age of 3 who can sit with a book in their lap and turn 1 page at a time. Whereas much younger children may just flip the book forward and backward, not necessarily 1 page at a time because their motor grip is still developing. Sequencing is the idea of keeping an idea in order in your mind so that you can link it up. You know, stories are sequential. The story makes sense because I remembered what happened in the beginning, what happens in the middle, and what happens in the end. That ability to sequence makes storybooks important in the development needs of a child. And of course, that they are, immersed in pretend play. Give a 3-year-old a stick and it can become so many things. It's the beginning of symbol making in the mind, where a stick can be a plane, it can also be a stick, it can be a ruler, it can be a sleeping person on the bed, it can be so many, many things. This ability only human beings have, to take one image and mentally make it so many things. And children in the preschool age are able to do this automatically. So these stories are meant to harness these needs of children. And for parents of standard 1 and 2, again, I hope some of these book covers are familiar. Besides everything that we just spoke about, perspective, beginning to understand perspective is now coming in. And what does one mean? Is that you may not agree with the tiger in the Punyakoti story. You may think the tiger was a fool. And yet you're able to listen to what the tiger did. You're able to say, yeah, but he made that choice. I think he was wrong, but he made that choice. At a younger age, understanding another person's point of view is not easy. It's developmentally not possible. And so we need to harness it when we know it's happening. And books like this, where a home of our own, especially for all our children who come from really precious, safe, secure homes, to read a story maybe about children in play who make their own home might seem strange, but it allows for perspective. It allows for them to think this is possible. This also exists in the world. And that's so important for us to grow as better human beings. The beginning of alphabetic code and symbols is growing stronger, right? So our children are beginning now to read on their own. And that will get reinforced in books like this. Of course, opening the world, the idea of the windows. Beginning to see different styles of illustration. Actually, that's a really joyful exercise, that you open a book and look at how the artist has done those pictures, open another book and say, what's different? What's same? How does this visual language make sense? What are they doing here? Opens another world of art and imagery for our children. Connecting thoughts across time and space, which is what happens in stories like, say, Jadav and the Tree Place, is your child may have not yet met an ecologist like Jadav who believes so strongly that tree planting is critical for the world and for climate change. But this book will open that window, and how precious that is. And to think that somewhere there is somebody like Jadav who's making a difference to the planet. Standard 1 and 2 parents, please encourage questions. Please encourage your children to arrive at their own conclusions, because stories give us that space. There's no right and wrong answer. There shouldn't be a right and wrong answer. Because your child is growing in language, your conversations will be deeper. You'll be able to talk more. You'll be able to discuss more. And that is really a hallmark of language proficiency. So it's not just reading and writing, but it's also thinking and talking. And that will happen if both of you are excited about the storybook. And your vocabulary, your structures, your expressions will all get enhanced because you've shared together some of the books in the book bag. So to just go back on this idea that why these books in the bag, there were two overarching things. One was what makes a collection and how we tried to honor genre, theme, language, representation, and format. And what are the needs of, say, a nursery and prep child vis-a-vis a standard 1 and standard 2 child? Some of you who have older children may appreciate that the books change as children get older. I hope you're able to see that our intention was very, very purposeful in trying to give you a diverse collection of books in that book bag. And I hope that you will remember that this entire exercise is to begin and nurture a reading relationship, and it's founded on trust. So the last part of this time I want to talk to you, I wanted to devote on just really simple practices that you can, and I'm sure you must be doing in your home. And so we'll just move. Oh, sorry. Before that, I wanted to share something with you. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yes, findings. Sorry. Thank you, Radhika. I forgot this. So we've been trying to understand really how have children been reading a lot in the lockdown, and what have they been reading? How do children get access to books? And sadly, not yet in our country. I continue to be hopeful. We don't do large-scale studies. We don't do enough of research to document reading for pleasure. So we have to rely on countries like America that invest in reading research. And it could be for many reasons. The findings that I'm sharing now with you come from a group called Renaissance that run a huge program across public schools in the United States, which is called Accelerated Reader. It's a very big state-funded program which states all subscribe to, that documents what children are reading, how many words they're reading, how fast they're reading, and what types of books they're reading. And this study showed us, they had in school for 1920, and then they documented in homes across 50 states for 2021. And so I'm just pulling out the main averages here, is that for what they call pre-K, which is really the year before standard 1, the study showed that children read 20 books. And of these 20, 52% were read to children. So I was thinking in your book bags, if you have 10 books, then 5 of those books parents should be reading to children. The other 2 of those books are being read with children. And then there were 27 would perhaps be 2.5 or 3 books that children were looking at on their own. So in a year of 9 months of so-called school time, that was the kind of numbers of books that children read. And as you can see for standard 1, it more than doubles to 45 books. And here, much fewer are being read to kids. Some equal 17% being read with, And we'll come to what is the difference between to and with. And then there was a significant percentage of this that were read independently, which means a collection should also have books that are at the right level of the child, where the child's reading level is. And we found in our own work that if you put too difficult books in the box or in the selection, actually children get withdrawn from the act of reading. So I've always felt it is a very sensitive relationship to put books which are exactly where the child is, and maybe even some that are in the beginning slightly easy, so that their confidence with reading builds up. After perhaps grade 3, we can begin to challenge. But if you challenge too early, I have experienced that children actually just decide, "Mujhe nahi padhna hai," and they stop this relationship with books. So it is sensitive, and you know your child best. And trust. I think if you keep that in mind, you will not make a single error. Standard 2 read about 61 books in the school year, and again, fewer were read to children. A very small percentage was read with, which is called paired reading or shared reading. And a significant percentage was read independently by children. So we also know then that children's independent reading skill is growing through this finding. Radhika, we'll move on. There's some snapshots from the study itself. What I was interested in also were the top topics that children were reading, and we can also see the numbers that were surveyed. So, for kindergarten, it was like 1,57,000 children. For grade 1, 7,35,000 children. And yeah, for grade 2, it was 10 lakh children who this study is based on, which makes me think we need to look at what it found. What was lovely was even the population didn't belong to one kind of socioeconomic group. It was across socioeconomic groups. It was also across languages. And the findings also show us which were the top books in Spanish, which were the top books in English, and which were the top books in some other languages, including Arabic. So very interesting and very important, I think, for us to know and to trust again, that these ideas are not coming just from the air. These ideas that please read to your children, please ensure that your children have access to books are coming because we know from reading research that this is critical time period. And the fact that our children are not in schools and are not being surrounded by the amount of text that would have happened in schools makes me feel that home reading has to be much stronger this year than it was last year. So I hope some of this helps you. Radhika, we'll move forward. Yeah. So in this very last short segment, I want to just share some ideas of what you can do with books in the home. And I'm sorry if I'm being presumptuous. As I said at the beginning, I really wish I knew more of you, but I don't know you and I don't know what you're doing. So I'm just throwing ideas, and if they make sense, catch them. If they don't, let them go. So this idea of reading with is that a child and an adult sit together with a book and read. Now, for many working parents, this must be really hard. So I've been asking people who even come into the library or who consult with us, don't hesitate to ask an older child, to ask a friend, to ask a neighbor, because this becomes a joyful experience for both. To ask a grandparent, oh, they love it. To read to the child and to read with the child. So with them too, one is where we are reading in a way that the child is also contributing to the text. So you say, okay, so what is happening here? And what do you think is happening in this picture? Or if your child already has some reading proficiency, then the child reads one sentence, you read the next, or the child reads every time the child hesitates, you supply the word. These are acts of reading with. And reading to is one person is the voice and one person is the listener. The most intimate relationships of reading happen with reading to, because I have observed many adults turn into some kind of pseudo teacher when they are reading with. So don't complicate life. If it's simpler for you, just read to. one book a day, one story a day, the benefits are phenomenal. And don't hesitate to ask for help. I wish I lived near some of you. I would love to read to your children. And like me, there'll be many volunteers who will be happy to read. So please ask. Some other ideas for activating interest. We'll go forward. Yes. Three big ones for me have been in the course of our experience: choice, the kind of stance we do, and the temporal nature, the regularity of our acts of reading. And I've said this before, and like this old record, I'm going to say it again. Choice is interesting, actually. One is we've chosen now for you. So in some ways, we've taken away your agency to go to a bookstore and buy those 10 books for your child. But I'll remind you that we're doing it with the best intention. There is knowledge and domain expertise, and there is trust. Now that we've chosen, there are 10 books. Who decides which book to read first, when, again, how many times? It's often lovely if you let your child choose, because agency in the act of reading is really important. Now, sometimes children can be counter-demanding and say, no, I don't want to choose, or I'm not reading. And this is where negotiation is important. Or the child may be bringing the same book and you feel like throwing up if you see the same book. Again, we are reading this book. This is when you'll negotiate and you say, now, yesterday you chose, so today can I choose? And keep those windows open, because that's really what a relationship is about. As much as possible, don't let these reading relationships become didactic or negative, and don't bribe. So if you read, then you can do this, or once you read, then, because I think after some time that bribe holds no value and the reading has not become this positive thing. Read because you want to read with your child. From some place in you, dear parent, find that energy and say, I want to read with you. That positivity is something your child will pick up about the act of reading. And like all good habits or bad habits, the temporal nature, right? The time, how often you do it, how regular you do it, how ritualistically you do it, actually makes something part of our practice, our traditions, and our culture. And so be regular with this act of reading. This is really important. And I urge you to keep these three principles in mind. I wanted to then move on to this idea of what you can do, some questions you can ask when you have books with you. This would apply to all the 4 grades who are here. Very basically, we can look at book covers and ask a gamut of questions and have conversation, encourage children to ask you questions. It's such fun. They ask, in fact, children ask really tricky questions because they've not yet been embedded in that what world that, comes to many of us, or who world. And so they may ask you really tricky questions that form this beautiful, fun relationship. So great way to start reading a book is to look at the cover and to use the pictures to talk about things. You're strengthening vocabulary, you're practicing the art of questioning, which is the foundation for all critical thinking. You are hopefully doing this in the language of the home. So you are building on that intimacy and the home language. And each of you are listening to each other in a very shared form, very different from giving instructions and listening. So many books have this visual galaxy where you can ask many questions. You'll see the kind of detail in the illustrations. They're not just pictures, there are worlds in every page. For, I think, a prep that got a C in the C in a bucket, it's a conceptual book. It's a book about the water cycle. And you'll be amazed at how beautifully and simply it's told, but how every page you can spend easily 15 minutes just looking at what's there, talking, playing I Spy, identifying things, having fun, finding out what this is called in different languages, and getting the concept of how the sea is in a bucket and where does water come from. Quite a fantastic book. So please spend time with it. And any parent here who's in class 1 and 2 and didn't get sea in a bucket, make a friend with a prep parent and borrow widely. Borrow, please. So use the illustrations. I think standard 1 would have the mountains of Mumbai. And this was a very conscious choice for 2 reasons. One reason is that it's a book that represents a city. And most of us are beginning or do live in highly urbanized areas or areas that are becoming urbanized. But many of our children actually don't know what the world was like before buildings, before roads, before bridges, before all that concretization. But many of us adults may know because of experiences in our childhood or visits to what we call native homes, or trips into holiday trips into quieter places. So the mountains of Mumbai actually beautifully evokes life in a city, and yet it has an innocence and a joyousness where one child is introducing the city to another child who's come from the Himalaya region, from Ladakh, and who can't make sense of this city. And because our children are beginning to understand perspective, they understand both children's points of view. And so this kind of a book allows deep opportunity to ask questions. Where would you like to live? Where do we live? How do you think these characters are feeling? What are we seeing? Each page again can evoke so much of language, expression, thinking together, talking, and therefore feeling. And our relationship with the act of reading becomes stronger. And there are some books where we've consciously chosen them for a distinct illustrative style, but also representative of the beauty of this land we live in. One example is, Excuse Me, Is This India? The entire illustrations are done in fabric and cloth and stitched. And it has this outsider view of someone visiting, and in this case, it's a mouse who gets on a plane to visit India, and what he sees as unique about this country. And we've had extremely rich sessions with children, asking the children to imagine if they had to tell somebody from outside about whatever they know about their world, how would they do it? What are the things they would focus on? What do they love about this book? It's quirky, it's funny, but it's also real. It evokes really fantastic emotional responses from children when you sit down quietly to look at all the detail in this book. So there's a tendency amongst us, simply because I feel nobody has spent time opening out picture books for adults, to think that, acha, read the story and the book is done. But there's every book in this bag you can return to time and time again, and every time you can get something more from the book. It's not just the story. So I invite you and welcome you to try this exploration and to return to these books with conversations, questions, thinking together, and trusting that the books will foster deeper relationships between you and your child. I thank you for this gracious and gentle listening. We will spend the next 25 or so minutes on questions and answers. If anyone ever wants to directly talk with me, my email is on the screen, or you could write to Shraddha or your principal, and the mail will get to me eventually. It's been an honor and a privilege to share these ideas with you this evening, and I look forward to the question and answers. Thank you. Okay, Radhika, can we stop the presentation perhaps? Yeah, that may be nicer, no? So let me take the first question, which is, I think, a fundamental question. It is, when you talk about foundations of reading, what are the components that make this foundation? Such a good question. I wish I could see you, because if I just ask the question back, you would know intuitively a number of the foundations, right? So definitely the most obvious one is that because reading is about decoding, right? There is a code. It may be a picture code or an alphabetic code. That code has to be decoded, right? So knowing the symbol and the code and having the proficiency to decode it is a critical thing, which is why we spend so much of time, particularly in preschool and grade 1, working on the sound symbols, working on the rules of the alphabetic system, because the code is important. With the code, comprehension is important, which is the language in which this code is. So if your child comes, for example, from a non-English speaking home and is learning the code in English, then at the same time, we want this child to also be able to listen to some English, and stories play this critical role to maybe at times even talk to somebody when it's possible in English, or be absorbed a little bit in an English speaking world, because that's how we acquire language meaningfully in a context, not decontextualized, right? So it would be learning the code as the one critical foundation, comprehension as the other critical foundation. Very important, whichever parent asked me this, is actually something we take for granted, and that is motivation. Why do I have to do this? So brain science has shown that when we are fired up in our minds, right? When our motivation centers are excited, certain chemicals get released in our brain that allows us to process and function at a particular way. And children who know why they are reading or what they are reading or enjoy reading with somebody actually are better placed to get these proficiencies. And this is where this relationship with reading is critical. It should be intimate, it should be warm, it should be with someone who loves you. This has been found to be important. Reading at home has been found to be a critical indicator of a child's proficiency to read. Children who are read to at home, who are surrounded by books, unfortunately, for those who are not, I'm saying it, have shown on test scores to be better readers than those who do not come from literate reading homes. So this is our clue to turn our homes into reading joyful spaces. I'm trying to think what else for this young age would be critical. So I've done motivation, language comprehension, the code, the relationship. I think that basically it would be this. If we can keep these 4 things in mind, I think these would make the foundations. You could break it up further into vocabulary and things like that. But I think for now, for this milieu, I'd like to rest that answer here. But it's a very good question. Thank you for asking. The next one is, my child is loving the books from the read bag. Thank you. And is asking for more books of similar kind and style. How can we, the child and I, do this on our own? We don't want to ask you or the school to recommend books. We wish to figure out our own way. Could you show us a way, please? I'd say go to a library. I don't know where you live. I hope there's a library for children somewhere where you live. That's perhaps the finest way, because you can browse. That's what a library is for, browsing and then selecting what you want to borrow and then going back and returning it. Bookshops are also very kind about browsing. They do allow you to browse and select, and to spend time looking, and that could be one way. But while I do appreciate and respect that you want this journey on your own, I think like any journey we start, having a guide is not a bad thing. It's not a limitation. In fact, I think it's a powerful thing to know you have a guide. So don't feel this is something you have to find a new path on your own and suffer through. Oh, no. In fact, in the work we do, we feel purposeful only when we are able to help and support somebody else. So if it would help you and you wouldn't feel dependent or whatever you're feeling, please do ask. We can send you a virtual shelf of books, which is what we're doing for a number of our children in the library. We send them a virtual shelf so they have this experience of browsing, and then they tell us which books they want, and we're home delivering those books. And we're also now posting books to different places. So, I mean, we're happy to do this if you want it. If you want to do it on your own, I think a bookshop or a library is where you have to browse. Browsing, a lot like Punyakoti, the act of grazing, and suddenly you encounter a surprise. Browsing is a very important act in the journey of reading. I need to look at many things before I decide what I want. And once I become a reader, I get a little bit set, and I may know I read only nonfiction and therefore these are the books I want. But in the beginning, browsing is glorious because the world opens up. Thank you for that question. And I hope I've sort of answered it. So the next question, which is again, I mean, your questions are brilliant, parents. Thank you. Perspective is difficult to convey to children, like you said. What is a good way to explain to kids about people who are homeless, children who have lost a mom? These are tough topics to tackle. Very tough. Very tough, and also for some of us might also seem out of the scope of right now the way we want to imagine our children's childhood. So I'm just going to take a minute to talk a little bit about this idea of childhood. For many years, actually in the 1800s and 1900s, there was no conception of childhood as a category. You were born, and when you could do things, you began to do things, and then you just grew up, and when certain organs could function in certain ways, certain things happened. And very early industrial revolution did not actually segregate childhood from adulthood. So we have evidences where children worked in factories, children and right now in the 21st century, we are outraged because this idea of human rights, of childhood, have all gained prominence with the way we've grown as humanity. And we are now anchoring ideas about society based on new ways of thinking. Now with childhood, and particularly this idea of a romantic childhood, I suspect we are slower to give up on this idea. So many of us want to hold on to this idea that childhood has to be a time of only good things and only joy and bliss. And the reality is that no childhood, whether you're in an elite home or in a depressed home, is constant like that, because the mind and our emotions and our responses to stimuli provoke all kinds of feelings. So somewhere to also again trust that this idea of only exposure to good things is a fallacy. We all deserve good things, whether you're a child or an adult. We all deserve to laugh, to have funny stories, to just reminisce, to be quiet, to think deeply, to feel pain, but at different levels. So to answer your question, parent, about topics that are difficult to convey, one thing I've done with a number of educators who come with the same problem is we discuss first how comfortable I am. If you are not comfortable with a topic, then I genuinely think you need to invest a little more in preparing yourself, because children are sensorial beings. They pick up discomfort, they pick up tension, they pick up that the parent doesn't approve of something or doesn't like something without you even saying it. So if you open a topic, a lot of your emotive responses are going to come through. So first examine how you feel. And if you feel that, no, I do not want my child to know about death, Or I'm not ready to talk about, families that are broken up and that there is only a single parent. Don't. I think that's where choice is so important, and the value system of your home is so critical. Nobody can compel you to do that. But if you want to do it and you still feel you can't, I think there's no powerfuler tool than the story, because the story does that for you. So I feel that what the story does is it provides us with this cushion between me and the recipient. I mediate the difficult topic through the story. And then I can discuss it in the simplest way. So many children I have met who have encountered difficult books, they close that book when it's done, or they return it, they don't want to talk about it. And we must respect this, because even as adults, not all of us are able to talk about what happens or what we experience immediately. Everything has a gestation. Let it be, but be present so your child knows that you can talk about it. And one very simple way I have found that helps when something's difficult is to talk about it from your point of view, not trying to second guess the child. So, I didn't like this book because it is a sad book. And I didn't like this book because somebody dies in it. And I really don't like this idea of stories where people die. I think children trust us, Sadly, we forget to just constantly give that back. They'll love this conversation with you, and I hope this helps. So very simply, think of your own feelings about this. See how you can prepare yourself. Find a book that does it, and does it in a way that's not upsetting to anybody, and share your own feelings without putting pressure on the reader. But the question you ask is actually a fundamental question for us in work with books, is that books, we look at them as objects or artifacts that will make us better human beings. And for us to become these better human beings, all our centers of humanness have to be activated in our lifetime. Not just thinking centers and doing centers and becoming better managers and more efficient timekeepers, but also better human beings. And I can become a better human being when I can understand that there are experiences that other people have that I may not have, but I can understand with reading their stories how maybe the world is for them. So I really hope you embark on this journey, because the question's beautiful. So the next question is that DPS has begun taking these books on Monday. I'm assuming sessions. The class teachers do that very well with activities. Woohoo to DPS class teachers. So I don't feel very confident in doing as good a job. What would be your take on my stance? However wonderful the DPS class teacher is, and however magically she's opening a book, I think what you'll bring by sitting with your child in a one-to-one with a book is immeasurable. So try. And no harm from the teachers doing and you doing. Another question is, which is more effective, read to or read with? So such an interesting question. They are not necessarily one versus the other. So in this journey, there would be read, and it's again not linear, right? So it's not like this first, then this, then this. But read to is one kind of act of reading. Read with is one. And just read, which is independent reading, is another. Now, there was a time, even as close as maybe a decade back, that we believed that reading was linear, in the sense that, you read to children, then you read with children, and then children begin to read well alone. And further studies have shown us that children who have high proficiency in vocabulary and fluency in reading are children who have been read to and are continuing to be read to, which is why we have a practice in work, which we call the read aloud pedagogy, which is you read aloud to groups of children. Now, in read aloud, we always read a book that is either more complex in theme and sentence and language structure than where the group of children presently are. So on a comprehension level, it may be more complex, or on a scriptural level, it may be more complex. But we are reading it out so that that vocabulary, that syntax, that way of writing, and that story, and those ideas are falling onto the child, and then they are able to talk and think too. So there is no which is more effective. Actually, what is wonderful is your child will actually tell you when they've had enough of with or to. I've encountered children who say, now I want to read by myself. Or children who will come back now to the library, even as 13, 14-year-olds, and they'll say, when are you reading aloud? I want to sit in the group. Adults I've met who say, please, will you just read aloud to us? So it's a very human and a very perhaps personal thing, but it should first start as a practice. Everybody should have that opportunity to be read to, read with, and to read. After that, each one may decide. Here there's a question. Share a little more on code and comprehension bits of reading. How are the two different? Yeah. Again, a lovely question. So let's say I'll give you a really simplistic example because I can't see you and I don't have my board. But very simply, if you take a 3-letter word like cat, okay, this is really simplistic, so forgive me. So you have cat in English, which is made up of 3 sounds, cat, or 2 largely with the vowel, cat, yeah. So I could separate it distinctly with cat. So 3 sounds, and each sound is captured by a symbol that is could be written in the English alphabet Roman script as either this or the K. Both make the K sound. A is by the vowel whose name is A, and in fact A has 8 sounds, so that's what makes English complex. But it has a sound A, and it looks like the letter A, and then T, which is name is T and looks like that, right? Now this is the code. An alphabet that looks like that, his name is T, his sound is T, right? This is the code. And to say, read the word cat, this child has to discriminate or identify 3 shapes, that's C, A, and T, elicit in their mind 3 sounds, 1 for each in a sequence, and blend them together to make this sound cat. Now, comprehension is that when I see cat, I should know what it is. So I have encountered many children who can decode, but who don't have comprehension. And that's not reading, that's just decoding. Understanding what I read in the sense that knowing when I say cat, that it's this 4-legged domestic animal that purrs and that we may have at home, and you know, everything that catness brings to your mind is what is comprehension. So they are different. One draws on language and one draws on the skill of sound and symbol sequencing and memory and attention. So you will appreciate how complex this is, but you will also begin to get so fascinated that the human mind can actually read, and that our children read. And what a celebration that is, really. So I hope that helped. Thank you for that question. This is a really, thank you, parent, for asking. I was wondering why nobody's throwing hard questions at me. If children don't concentrate on reading, then what do we do? Nah? I'm hoping this is a really young child. And I'm hoping, like we know from brain science, that concentration is also a mental function. It's the ability to self-regulate behaviorally, but it's also based on certain chemicals in our brain that allow more attention and less attention. So sometimes this is a function of age. As a child grows older, their concentration improves. Sometimes it's a function of behavior. So that fact that our children are not in schools and they are not therefore being taught to regulate attention in periodic fashion that school timetables give us, they're at home with more flexibility, may also be impeding concentration. So it's really for you to either wait and watch, or to actually trust yourself in saying whether this is something you want to start being worried about or not. But for a reading relationship and concentration to go together, I think you have to be a bit ziddy in the sense that even if it is concentrate on one page and both of you look at it together, or even start with 15 seconds of looking at a book cover, shouting out one thing that you like from this cover and then running away, and doing this with discipline in different ways every day, you'll build concentration. So I think for you, parent, I'm sending you strength so that you don't give up. I know it's hard. It's quite hard. But think, if you know why you want to do it, I find that you come up with magical ways to make this game and fun and yet a pleasurable exercise for you and your child. Sorry if that wasn't super helpful, but at this point, that's all I could share. Voice modulation, what role does that play in reading together with kids? What if I'm unable to do that with my brief? Yeah, storytellers give all of us a bit of a complex, because they'll use their voices in ways. It's not a necessary function of being read to at all. It's a slightly more dramatic way of reading. What it does is that it also communicates emotion and therefore helps comprehension. Like if my voice changes when it's a strong character, or my voice changes when it's a weak character, I'm also letting the listener know who is speaking when, but it's not at all a necessary function to read to a child. So please use your normal reading voice. You do not have to have voice modulation in any dramatic way. And you'll be amazed at how it comes, because as you get into the story and meaning is happening in your brain, actually your voice will not be the same. It's quite amazing to see. So just start as naturally as possible. Just read. Just trust the story. Let the story tell the story. You don't worry. Sorry, I'm a bit confused about this. Does the young man in the audience from class 7 want to ask me something? It would be my joy, my absolute joy. What can we talk about? What would he like to ask me? Shraddha, you're giving me too much of pressure with your comments. What about props for reading and puppets? They, of course, help for storytelling. But for storybook reading, the book is the prop and the illustrations are the props. So we actually trust the creator of the book to hold that story up. But maybe if you have a larger group of children, or you are just telling a story, you may want to have a prop. That's really, again, what is your intention? What are you doing? So storytelling is slightly different from story reading. And today we were really focusing on how the books can become artifacts in our home in order to encourage reading relationships. So props definitely help when you are telling stories. Yeah. So the firstly, thank you, young one, for being in the audience. It's just, these are really my joys as somebody who works with young people, to always encounter a young person who wants to be here, who's chosen to be here, who wants to know something about the act of reading. So thank you for being here. I hope you're enjoying your read bag. From the top of my head, I cannot immediately remember what went into the class 7 bag. But the fact that you're here makes me think that you are interested in reading. And the fact that you are interested in reading makes me feel confident to say, like the old fortune tellers of the past, that only good things will happen to you. Because when you read, and when you read deeply, suddenly everyday problems can also find their answers in the act of reading. Everyday joys find their answers in the act of reading. And we just become, I think, more able to be in this world, which is getting more and more complex. So I wish you a big, big reading hug. And thank you for being on this parent webinar with me. I'm so honored. I hope we meet at some point. Ooh, that's a tough question. The parent who asked, this is a series of webinars. What all do you have in store for us in future sessions? So dear parent, one thing I really desired is for you to show me the way forward. What do you want to know? We are limited by this format, but I think I can also be challenged by the format. So if I know what you want, I can actually really push myself to design what the future webinar will have. That is what you want. Today, I had some clarity that I wanted to open this book bag for you. I don't know yet what to do for the future. I just know that this is a relationship even with you, and it's 1 and 2 meetings is not enough. So unfortunately, I'm in your life for this academic year. So you tell me, please tell me, what would you like? What are you thinking about? What would you want? And I'll do my best. Someone asks, what's the best rule for learning? Yeah. And I don't know if again there is one. Let's, I mean, it seems slightly philosophical, but I think intention is a critical thing even from living. Yeah, why am I doing what I'm doing? I think when young children, and definitely young adults, know why they are doing what they are doing, I have seen how engaged they can be in learning. So I've always felt that if we can also trust our children by telling them why they are doing what they are doing, their intentionality to do something changes. And when intention changes, I think learning becomes enriched. Of course, we have models of so-called good learning, which maybe were forced or were didactic, or there was a pressure and therefore you learned. These are proven and true. Are they the best? I don't know. So if you have the privilege of intention, of sharing, and of knowing why you are learning what you're learning, I think that kind of learning is incredibly powerful. But it may not be the only. So this idea of the best kind of frightens me. So we are about to close, and I deeply again go back to my thanks, parents, for trusting me, for being with me on this journey, and for giving of your time in this larger, complex time that we're all living in. I hope all of you return to the book bag this evening and read one book, even alone or even as a couple. with or without your child, as the start of your own reading relationship, and then with your child is something you do every day. My commitment to you is as strong as ever. I'm available for any conversations, messages, calls, if they're hard or soft. I want you to know that I trust that when you raise things with me, you're also looking for answers. So thank you and have a wonderful evening.